Yeah, for sure. So, you mentioned like a lot about like language models and how they're becoming like more further integrated into our lives, and I think like the rise of language models especially has kind of drawn a lot more attention to AI. So like right now, if like when anyone is like says like if you're like in like a job interview, when you see you use AI, like most people just like kind of assume that you're talking like messing around with the GPT and stuff like that. Like earlier, like my mom, she used to like whenever she wrote like in any email, she kind of like asked me or my dad if the wording seemed right. But now even like now she's using the GPT to kind of like make sure emails are like looking good before she sends them. And yeah, like language models are really like kind of like drawn like a spotlight on AI, and they're really like changing how things shape out to be. And on the topic of that, over like the 300 episodes that you've had on AI, like what do you think is your favorite recent AI advancement or something that you find noteworthy?
Good question. I mean, there's a lot of things I find noteworthy, like advancements that I'm following. I'd say the maybe the most important one is well, I'm going to answer this in two parts. I'm going to say answer engines. So, we see that in Perplexity. Also, people don't know this, and I'm not trashing Google Gemini, but Google Gemini has problems connecting to Google, which is ironic. Claude from Anthropic is a fantastic model, but it's not connected to the internet. So, I think you really have, if you uh, kind of have to put Microsoft Copilot and GPT from OpenAI kind of in the same umbrella, since Microsoft is reportedly a 49% equity owner. They've invested more than $10 billion. So when I talk about kind of Chat GPT, I'm also kind of talking about Copilot, because essentially whatever Chat GPT and OpenAI roll out, Copilot gets. So essentially you have OpenAI and you have Perplexity, which obviously can use both OpenAI, Claude, etc. Anyways, that's an area that I am extremely interested in every single day, because I think that's going to be almost the gateway drug, so to speak, for people that are AI naysayers, or for companies that aren't sure how are we going to use AI? Maybe we shouldn't be copying and pasting our entire, quarter 3 report and generating, I don't know, our docs inside AI, maybe for reasons they don't understand. But you are not going to be able to get around the future of answer engines, right? So even if you're not logging into Google Gemini, right? Google's been experimenting with its AI overviews, which previously was SGE, which is Search Generative Experience. Microsoft, when you go to use Bing as a search engine, it already does it. So I think that's an advancement and something that I'm always paying attention to, because that's one of the things that is going to quote unquote come for people. So even if you don't want to use I do think eventually all the search engines that we use to get information and that we spend so much time on, right? Like I gave those examples earlier. Oh, whether you're a student doing this, starting a new business, researching your competitors, whatever, you're using a search engine, right? And I think that's where AI and large language models, when you come up with this, or when you refer to them as answers engines, which is essentially, and people don't know, ChatGPT does this. If you know how to use Browse with Bing correctly, it will perform and act very much like Perplexity. So instead of visiting those 15 websites and spending maybe 15 to 30 minutes on 15 of those websites, so what? That's anywhere from 3 to 7 hours if you're doing a big research paper. Now it's like 3 to 7 seconds. When you think of bringing that process into an answers engine like Perplexity, like using properly Browse with Bing in GPT-4o. So that's an advancement that I'm paying a lot of attention to, because I think that is going to be one of the biggest areas, along with once Google kind of makes that their de facto search for most queries. I think that's something that is really going to change the way that we all not just work, but the way that we learn and also the way that we think.
Yeah, it's a really good point, especially when you talked about how it's affected industry so far and how different companies, like you brought up JP Morgan, how they recently introduced LLMs to, or how they have their own LLM to do certain tasks. How do you think AI and generative AI in specific is going to affect the economy and business industries in general? Like, to what extent do you think it's going to affect it?
AI's been keeping the U.S. economy afloat for more than 2 years. People don't look at that, right? Because you go back, every single analyst said, coming out of the pandemic, like mid 2022, every single analyst, when they were projecting for 2023, said recession, right? Because we had a couple straight quarters where things weren't looking good. And then this generative AI boom kind of happened in the fourth quarter of 2022 with the release of ChatGPT. Obviously, generative AI was not born then, but a lot of people kind of point to that as the quote unquote birthplace, right? When the rest of the world found out about what generative AI is, what large language models are. And essentially since then, and this isn't just me, I've literally done countless hours of original research on this. AI companies, specifically, you look at the Magnificent Seven. You don't even need Tesla. Throw Tesla out. Look at the rest of the Magnificent Seven. So you have Apple, you have Microsoft, you have Nvidia, you have Meta, you have Amazon, and I think I'm missing one more. Did I say Google? Maybe not. Anyways, like all of these companies that are building large language models, they are the reason why the economy has quote unquote grown, right? And they have a disproportionate amount of credit, or they're carrying a disproportionate amount of weight for the US economy. Never in the history of the US economy have six companies accounted for that much of the US's economic growth. Like it's literally never happened, and people aren't paying attention to it. They're just like, oh, cool, economy's looking great. Yeah, we know these tech companies are doing a lot. Thumbs up, buddies. Keep doing your thing. No, like literally AI has been running this entire country, right, for 2 years. And I think people are overlooking that. Overlooking that. So people are always asking like, oh, how will AI impact the economy? It's like, no, like I think it's those companies in 2023 had, I think 72%. It was right in the low 70s of the S&P's gains for the entire year, right? Of 500 companies, those six companies accounted for more than 70% of the growth, right? Which is bonkers. Because I think previously the most any six companies had accounted for was like 20 some percent. So like when people talk about like, oh, AI, what will it do for business? What will it do for the economy? It's like, y'all, it's already been happening. People just don't want to do the math or like actually realize how important generative AI has been for the US economy. And I think it will continue to be until things go south.
Yeah, that's a great point. And on that note, do you think that AI also could have like a negative impact on like the job market? And do you think that is a potential like ethical consequence that it may not be worth it to continue investing resources into AI growth and development?
Yeah, I mean, it'll absolutely be devastating for jobs. Yeah, I think people don't want to talk about that because everyone thinks, oh, AI, it's cool. Like look, I can make this fun little video, and I can make it can do my spreadsheet work in 30 seconds. Yay, this is great. I also did for our 1 year anniversary episode, I did a deep dive on this, and people don't want to come to the conclusion of AI is going to take away more jobs than it will create. Will it create tens of millions or hundreds of millions of jobs that don't exist today? Absolutely. I think the way that we work, in the same way that the internet really changed entire industries and sectors, right? You could say the internet was the biggest thing since the Industrial Revolution, but you can say that it changed the way that all of us work, but that took over the course of like 30 some years, right? I think generative AI is going to do even much more in a much shorter amount of time. And if there's one thing that I can say, it is Wall Street hates employees. They do, right? So all these same companies that I just talked about that are, meteoric growth, record stock prices, record revenues, right? Like the fact that there's three companies that are worth more than $3 trillion right now, market capitalization in the US, like that's mind boggling, right? But a lot of those same companies are minus employees than where they were a year ago, than where they were at the beginning of this year, because these companies are investing the most money into these areas. And they're like, oh, okay, Maybe we don't need 1,000 people in this department anymore, right? Maybe we only need 200. And I think as the rest of the business world starts to follow suit, right? So that's how the world operates, right? The biggest companies in the world, they compete against each other, acquire each other, go through all this drama, lawsuits, blah, and eventually one of them or a couple of them come out on top, and then the rest of the business world emulates what happened there. So I think that's what has already been playing out in 2024. We're seeing the biggest companies in the world invest billions, tens of billions of dollars, and so many of their resources into AI. Even think look at Apple. They pulled away all their resources from their self-driving car and they went into large language models. Look at Meta. They've pulled from behind the scenes, they pulled a lot of their resources from the metaverse and they've gone into large language models because the biggest companies have already found out that that is the future of how we all work. And I think the rest of the business world over the course of the next maybe 2 to 3 years is going to start to figure that out as well. I think, unfortunately, I'm not saying this as a pessimist, as an optimist. I'm saying this as a realist. I don't think there are going to be as many full-time jobs in the U.S. in 5 to 10 years as there are now. I think we will see a pretty big net negative in terms of full-time jobs. But on the flip side, I think there's going to be a lot more people that are just starting companies in a weekend, right? So as an example, let's say you want to go to a movie, right? You can go into your movie theater and there's, maybe 10 options. You can go on Netflix and let's just say there's 100 new options every weekend. You can go on YouTube and there's a bunch of low quality stuff. I think what we're going to see is high quality, highly tailored, so specific. So it's instead of going to the movies and seeing 10 different movies that may or may not resonate with you, I think you're going to have 100 high quality movies that are almost it's weird. It's built for you. So I do think the future is going to be people are going to just have a lot of their own companies. They're going to be working multiple kind of, side gig jobs. But I don't see in the long run AI having an overwhelmingly net positive impact on the number of full-time jobs because it's going to change the way that we work.
Yeah, and also on that note, do you think that businesses that don't integrate AI into their workflows will be affected negatively? And how do you
Yeah.
think that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't say this as a blanket statement, but yeah, if you're not using some sort of generative AI by the end of 2025, I don't see how you stay in business much longer. Again, think of it like the internet. Are there businesses out there that do not use the internet today? I mean, maybe there are, right? Maybe there are, but for the most part, 99% of all businesses in the US use the internet, right? You use it to process your payroll, you use it to email, you use it to present, you use it to learn. You use it literally every day. So I don't, like I said, I think the lines are going to blur, but I don't see any company, still saying, oh, no AI at all, hard stop, right? And still being in business in a year. You're not going to have really an option. If you're using the internet right now, if your company is using the internet right now, you will be using generative AI if you're not already weekly, daily, hourly, minutely, within a couple of months or a couple of quarters. That's just the way that this is working, right? Like I said, you don't really have a choice. Your search engines are going to be AI first. Your devices, there's going to be small language models on device, edge AI on here, whether you want it or not, right? So I do think that necessarily companies aren't going to have the choice if they're going to, oh, are we going to be an AI first company? It's well, if you use the internet today, you're going to be using large language models and generative AI. If not tomorrow, if not next week, you will be using them if you are going to still exist.
Yeah, that really makes you think about how much of an impact it's really had on our lives so far. And one analogy that our CS professor made in school was that AI is becoming more and more of what a calculator was to mathematics in the CS world. And do you think that with this advancement in AI and large language models and generative AI in general, that we'll be able to see those movie-like dystopian futures that we all think about and all we secretly hope for, but are also scared of in the next lifetime or so?
Yeah. So even I do want to first take a second to acknowledge that that comparison. It's a common comparison, but I think it's also kind of wrong, right? Nothing against your CS professor, but literally thousands of people are making that same comparison. But I don't think it's necessarily accurate for this reason, right? If you think of a calculator and what it did to math, right? There was still a lot of knowledge and human experience, right? Because if you have a calculator, can you do any math problem? Sure, but a human is still needed, right? Let's say it's a long word problem. You might have to do some calculations, quote unquote, before you even bring that problem into the calculator, right? If you're looking at graphs, charts, like, is a calculator helping you? Yes, absolutely. But there is still so much human knowledge, so much human experience, so much like quote unquote common sense that has to go into the process before you input that in the calculator. And then the same thing on the back end, right? You get a number out, but what are you going to do with that number? Is that number correct? Are you sure you put in the right number? How does that number help solve this problem, right? So I understand this whole calculator math comparison, but it's an apples to banana chips comparison. It's related, but it's not a sound comparison. It's really not. But when we talk about generative AI and the future of large language models, that's different, right? OpenAI just had another demo of their GPT-4o, the version that's not available to anyone with this more live assistant type features. And you don't need that, right? Like literally all you do is you click a button, it can see what's on your screen in real time. So you don't even have to have that same human interaction, that same human knowledge, that experience to translate what's in that long math problem to bring it to the calculator. All you do is you click, you say, I don't know what this is. Do it for me. And then it does it for you, or it can walk you through it and you can do it yourself, right? So on the front end, I understand the comparison. It is not 100% accurate. It's kind of like how when people say like, oh, AI won't take your job. Someone using AI will take your job. It's like, no, that's also dumb. It's not real. That's not accurate either, because whoever's using AI is going to take 10 people's jobs or 20 people's jobs, right? Not again, people like to make these comparisons when they're comparing two different things. To get to the latter part of that question, sorry, I went on a little rant there. But to get to the latter part of that question, are we going to be living in a dystopian future? Like, I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. Like the future in a couple of years is going to look weird. It's going to look weird, especially to people who are my age and who have kind of grown up with the internet, right? Like I was using the internet and AIM and email in like fifth grade. So I've been, using the internet, I don't know, for like 30, 20, 27, 30 years, right? So I think for people like me, it's going to be a little hard. If you're a little younger, I think it's not going to seem like such a dystopian, like futuristic world that we'll be living in. But I think it will be weird, right? I think, like I said, I think it's going to be very common to see, AI, generative AI robots in your everyday life. I think that we're going to, have a lot more of this kind of live agent assistance. I think that we're going to be working with many assistants, right? I think that, that's what we're going to spend the majority of our time doing in the future is, essentially co-piloting different assistants to accomplish different things. So although I don't, I can't say exactly what the future is going to look like, I do know it's going to change probably quickly. Where normally when you go through these big innovations, when you talk about the internet, when you talk about cloud computing, when you talk about mobile phones, when you talk about social media, generally these things happen over a 3, 5, 10, 15-year period, and people and businesses can take their time kind of adopting to it. But I don't think that's going to be the same with AI and how that affects our future. I think our future in 5 years, like how we're going to go from 2024 to 2029, I don't think we will have ever seen as big of a shift in 5 years in terms of interfacing and interacting in our daily lives as we will with generative AI over the next 5 years.
Yeah. So our old history teacher used to like kind of talk about this time period as like in the frame of like history, there's been like a lot of different time periods, a lot of different like revolutions, a lot of different movements. Kind of like describe this one as a technological revolution and how well the development of technology, globalization, and then of course now AI is like probably going to define how this era shapes out in the larger like scheme of history. And yeah, it's really like cool and kind of you're not exactly able to predict it, but it's cool to think about. And also like kind of like for like another like aspect of generative AI. So on the Everyday AI podcast, we're kind of wondering like how you guys make use of AI and generative AI, because like at least on our podcast, like we interview like a lot of different professors, a lot of different people who have like their own research. We make use of these like search engine AIs to like kind of like help us kind of go through that, summarize it, help us understand what they're working on, and it's really helpful for us. We're kind of wondering how you guys use it.
No, it's a great question. And we actually got that question so many times. Even, what I'd be interviewing people from large companies, and then after the show, they're like, wait, how are you using AI for everyday AI? So I actually did a full episode a couple, I don't know, a month or two ago, because so many people had questions. But we use AI everywhere. Like every part of our pre-production, in-show, post-production, content repurposing is all done with AI. So, show notes and, automation as well. So, on the front end, we're using, ChatGPT and Perplexity for some simple automations and simple research. When we record and go from the recording to production, I use a tool that I love called Cast Magic, which essentially we can upload our audio file, and we have a library of custom prompts, and it runs all of them at once, right? Where a lot of times you have to go and run things individually one by one. So I love using Cast Magic. The same thing, our podcast is video, it's live stream. So we have another kind of AI tool that automatically creates short social clips that we post on social media. I don't ever like pay attention to those. I'm not like a social media person, but other people enjoy them. So yeah, I mean, we use different AI, different generative AI, different large language models. Now we're doing, since projects came out inside Claude, we're using that a lot just to help organize our thoughts, organize our post production. Because another thing is after 300 and some episodes, it's a lot, right? And to work with large amounts of data, right? Hundreds of thousands of words sometimes, that's a good example where, now that, once all these big AI companies and, generative AI softwares, they'll release updates that are like, oh, this is, a complete new use case that we didn't have last week, right? So it is a constantly evolving process on how we're using AI, just as new different features become available in different systems.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on today. We really appreciate your time and everything you do. Would you like to quickly talk about Everyday AI, the podcast, and what you guys do on there?
Yeah, for sure. So we do a live stream and podcast and newsletter every single weekday, Monday through Friday. So yeah, it's a great place for people to learn, network. I mean, people have met each other in the comments and started companies together. So it's a great free daily resource to learn AI, to network, and to ask questions. That's the other thing. I do it as a live stream, right? Like where else could you ask a question of a senior director at Microsoft or a big startup founder? Where else can you ask someone a question on AI and get it answered like live in real time? I definitely do have to point out the unique aspect of that. But yeah, the daily podcast. So if you want to check it out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as our website. You can go to youreverydayai.com, and that's where we have our free daily newsletter where we recap the podcast for the day, as well as get out all the news and new tools that you might need to know.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan. And thank you, Neural Network listeners, for joining in today's episode. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and all of our social medias to get updated on the latest news on the Neural Network. Thank you for listening.